Hi, I'm Thibaut. I work in climate finance, helping nature-based projects get money. A few weeks ago, I traveled across Southeast Asia to see how it all works on the ground, meeting project developers, communities, and interviewing around 10 people on different climate finance mechanisms to fund their projects. Let's dive into this episode: carbon credits, scam or solution? Transparency is a really big topic in the climate finance space, of course, and especially for the next climate finance mechanism that we're going to focus on now, which is carbon credits. As most people know, carbon credits attract attention and controversy. But beyond the headlines, I wanted to focus on the projects that work because I'm convinced that when done well, they can create real impacts when done transparently and locally. This part is not about explaining how carbon credits are working, because there are plenty of videos that are already doing this pretty well. But let's say it's a tool that can be used on top of all the others that have been mentioned. Some argue the hard truth is that carbon credits are the only scalable financing mechanism. This can be discussed, but what is sure is that around the world you have some projects that are really highly qualitative, and I will share right now some humble lessons that I learned from them and from the field. So, in this section, I will focus on three parts. First, I will focus on what type of carbon credit financing schemes can be applied. Then I will focus on how do you attract more funding when you are a project developer and when you are a buyer, what you should look at when you look at carbon credits. And rather on a macro level or on an operational standpoint. And then finally, I share some of the challenges that have been raised from carbon project developers that I met on the ground, along with the ways to address them, and especially some potential actions at the governmental level, taking into account the study case of Sri Lanka. What we need to keep in mind is that not all carbon credits are created equal, and the real challenge is ensuring integrity, that the carbon saved or stored is real, additional, and permanent, while following the highest voluntary standards that are constantly evolving. So, how should you structure your carbon credit scheme? Well, as you can see here, you have several options, going from spot purchase, ex-ante forward contracts, carbon offtake agreements, carbon-backed loans, or via fund, SPV, equity investment, project financing. But of course, it depends on the scale of your project, the type of project that you want to finance, but also the time and effort that you want to put into the deal and to write the contract and all. And we're going to actually look at one of those instruments right now. For instance, forward contracts. How do they work, and why do they offer greater security for investors?
So this is where an investor would provide us with the capital early on at the start of the project in return for the delivery of future credits, whether that's carbon credits, biodiversity credits. And we securitize that, or we secure that payment by taking insurance from Western countries who provide innovative insurance products for the carbon market as well.
Having said this type of scheme, how do you attract rapidly more funding when you're a product developer, and what should you look at as a buyer? On a higher scale, here are some advice.
My advice to other project developers on raising capital would be twofold. Firstly, look at larger scale ambitious projects, because in my experience negotiating with investors, especially outside of Sri Lanka, outside of South Asia, is that they're looking for large scale investments. It's the same legal fees, the same paperwork that needs to happen. So in my experience, it's best if you could look at projects anywhere from 5 to 10 million upwards to really excite an investor. The second element I will touch on is really interviewing your investors. So what happens is during negotiations oftentimes, and that is the case where investors will try and get the best deal and oftentimes try and undercut or undermine the project developer, especially if you're in a country like Sri Lanka or South Asia, where they understand the costs of implementing projects are low, salaries are low compared to other countries. So they will try and undercut you. But my advice to you is to interview your investors, clearly state what your expectations are, especially in terms of benefit sharing, where a lot of the money would stay in Sri Lanka. That has to be made upfront because there are investors, there are trading houses internationally that would try and take most of the benefits for themselves and try and sell it for a higher price later on. To prevent that from happening, you must be upfront about what it is you're looking for, how it is you want to share the revenue, and you have to interview your investors.
Beyond financing, I also asked project developers for practical on-the-ground advice. After years of experience, what lessons have they learned? What would they recommend to someone starting an NBS project?
The project developer must demonstrate a strong ability to ensure the growth progressive of carbon credit until the project's duration, and demonstrate the ability to show diversified revenue streams from sustainable agricultures, livelihoods, or fisheries that are integrated and with guaranteed markets that ensure the stable price or potentially rising the commodity price.
On top of that, if grants, philanthropy, CSR funding fall short, project developers should focus, if they can, of course, on a mixed type of project, meaning with avoidance, REDD+ projects, improved forest management, or afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation, meaning ARR. Why? Because it can spread carbon credit revenues over the project lifespan, as we can see here in this report. And to make sure that the projects really reach high integrity level, the other advice is actually a really capital one. What would be the last advice that you would give to a project developer?
Demonstrating a robust MRV system to deliver credible, transparent, and very viable results.
Yes, it's true. dMRV is also key for the projects, and it's going to become way more efficient year after years. But you have to choose your dMRV carefully, of course. One project developer told me, for instance, that going from sampling method to census monitoring method, which takes more time, more effort, had an impact on his dMRV result by 20%. So it was improved by 20%. Sometimes they're also unsure about whether to use non-destructive or destructive methods. After 8-12 years, carbon sequestration slows as tree growth declines, and the carbon is then distributed throughout the entire tree system, including litter, soil, and below-ground biomass, not just the above-ground biomass. That's why a destructive method becomes necessary at that stage. So you can either outsource your dMRV or keep it in-house, or you can do both. So several project developers I met explained that although many dMRV solutions are available, they found that some of the tools that they use didn't provide accurate datasets for their specific context. They work well at larger scales, but for a highly localized context, the GIS team preferred to use their own dMRV and then to use the outsourced dMRV on top to compare. For example, land cover classification in Papua can be challenging because mangrove trees can have a structure that, if not properly processed, can be misidentified by satellite system as palm oil plantations. But it can also be really accurate. We can see it here on some footage from the European Space Agency, showing mangroves dying off after a dam was implemented from 2018 to 2021. And once the project is running, census monitoring can really be a more accurate possibility, but of course it really depends on the capacity of the project developers and also on the specific conditions that are on the ground. But when I talked to some field officers that were on the ground, they told me they really prefer planting rather than monitoring because it can be tedious and it can be exhausting under the heat, and especially counting trees one by one when you do census monitoring can be pretty tiring. So, would you recommend single tree monitoring to other project developers then?
It requires a big upfront investment, and whether it's worth it, it really depends on your project size.
And from there, I asked Don what would be his last advice that he would give to another project developer.
The most important point, not just for carbon project, but for sustainable finance as a whole, if we're looking at debt for nature swaps or anything in any marine projects, blue carbon projects, is the quality and the transparency of your MRV. Because if you are to monitor and verify your emissions reductions or your positive project outcomes, it is possible for you to sell your credits or your outcomes for a much higher price. Because what that does is it builds investor confidence in the final product. Investors know, people who buy these credits know that there's an underlying project behind your credit, and they're willing to pay a premium above other projects, above other markets to purchase these credits.
That's true, and gathering reliable data on the ground is key because it feeds into the dMRV reporting for all stakeholders. It can come from satellite alerts showing canopy loss, early fire warning systems, sometimes even provided by the Ministry of Forestry, camera traps, though sometimes they break because of sun bears or other animals. But in most cases, patrols remain the primary source of information. But, because of course there is a but, there are some challenges, and there is a kind of a paradox, which is that you have projects that are highly potential and that are already working well for years, but they can't have carbon credits because of external challenges and, for instance, at the government scale. And so that's what we're going to see here. Governments may be unaware, untrained, or face language barriers that complicate understanding. Governments don't always make clear decisions about which carbon credits can be sold. Some governments could launch large-scale restoration programs, but fail to properly monitor them. For example, they could aim to rehabilitate tens of thousands of hectares and offer compensation to local communities, but those communities could take advantage of it by claiming payments for existing mangroves or even double counting areas without actually planting anything. That's what could have been seen in one country I went to, for instance. Another key external dynamic can be land governance that remain often unclear, with contracts up to 10 years only, for instance, and contracts are sometimes not fully secured. As a result, certifiers may be unable to validate the different projects. And the last key external dynamic was highlighted by an auditor. She told me something that I found pretty interesting about the idea that there aren't actually that many qualified lead auditors out there in the Asian region where she's working. Even though many are going through training, it's still not enough for her. She said, we need more human resources to carry out these audits properly. So, even with conservation and restoration potential, scaling up can be tricky. In the end, it's all about how governments are coordinating, so whether for carbon ownership, contracts, benefit sharing, but it's up to everyone to push for more clarity. If we take a government, for instance, what actions can it take to help protect its natural environment?
I think one of the main duties of the state, given the multilateral environmental agreements that we have signed, is to tap the private sector's funding in order that the country's national biodiversity strategy and action plans are implemented. So basically what we need is the state to declare areas that need work on. For example, if they can give the private sector or any other developer a list of areas that are kind of sensitive and that need some work to restore them to their pristine conditions, then it would be easier for the private sector to invest.
And that is really important for the future, to find solutions for benefit sharing so that more smallholder farmers join restoration and conservation initiatives, such as this representative of village that I met in Indonesia in Borneo. I asked him, when did you join the reforestation and agroforestry program, and what motivated you to do so?
Nama saya Yatir Sabu. Pekerjaan sekretaris desa, alamat Desa Sumurmas. Saya bergabung dengan Yayasan Good Forest Indonesia kurang lebih 4 tahun sampai 5 tahun. Kami sangat tertarik bergabung dengan Yayasan Good Forest Indonesia karena dia tidak mengambil untuk keuntungan, cuma keuntungan untuk kami 100%. Harapan kami masyarakat Desa Sumurmas, jangan sampai Good Forest putus di jalan membina kami, bahkan sampai berhasil, sampai anak cucu kami ikut menikmatinya.
He's right. One memory that truly stayed with me was the welcome to this project actually. The young girls of the village perform a traditional dance just for our visit that you can see here. And right after that moment of celebration, we shifted to a public consultation, discussing how benefit sharing could look, especially compared to the offers from palm oil or gold mining companies. But in order to achieve that benefit sharing, you already need to push the companies to finance the projects and where a state can give the guidelines. And what are the other actions that a government can take to help protect its natural environment?
So we need guidelines, we need restoration guidelines in various ecosystems like coral reefs, forest ecosystems, mangrove ecosystems, national parks. There are many areas that guidance is to be given, and that would be really valuable to any company that can come up with some funding.
And as we can see, this funding goes far beyond carbon and the usual co-benefits that we hear. Such as the ones assessed by the core carbon principles, for instance, or some other co-benefits that we see in some other projects. Financing carbon credits or financing nature also supports traditional dances, languages, and cultures. And it's a way really to preserve them as well. There is still so much more to say about carbon credits, of course. But I wanted to keep it short to really share only what I learned from the field. But now we're going to focus on another type of financing that can seem smaller at scale, but that is actually really deeply rooted in social and people impacts. It goes beyond the project themselves, where you have some ecological, economical, political, social issues that you have to solve as well.
I don't think very many people understand the value of biodiversity.
And actually, it is to work together to, for the sake of the world, for the sake of the future of the children. Yeah.